My name is Maris Dean. I'm 34 years old, a cardiology resident, and a single mother of 3-year-old twins. 2 months ago, I was lying in an emergency room bleeding internally after a car accident. My hands were shaking as I dialed my parents' number. I needed anyone, to watch Oliver and Sophie for just a few hours while doctors tried to save my life. What I got instead was a text message in our family group chat that read, "You've always been a nuisance and a burden. We have Taylor Swift tickets with Claire tonight. Figure it out yourself." So I did. From my hospital bed, I called a nanny service paid triple the rate and made a decision that would change everything. I cut them off completely. The monthly mortgage payments, the health insurance, the car repairs, everything I'd been quietly paying for over the past 8 years. Gone. 2 weeks later, there was a knock on my door. Before continuing, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. I'd also like to know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love connecting with listeners from all over the world. Now let me continue my story. Growing up in the Dean household, I learned early that love came with a ranking system. My older sister Claire was the star. Always had been. She was 3 years older than me, effortlessly beautiful, and had this magnetic quality that made our parents light up whenever she walked into a room. When Claire announced she wanted to pursue fashion design, my mom cried happy tears. Dad called her our little visionary. When I said I wanted to become a doctor, Dad simply nodded. That's practical. That was it. Practical. I told myself it didn't matter. So I buried myself in textbooks, aced every exam, and clawed my way into one of the top medical schools in the country. 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of residency specializing in cardiology. The day I graduated from medical school should have been one of the proudest moments of my life. My parents arrived 2 hours late. Sorry, sweetheart. Mom said, not quite meeting my eyes. Claire had an emergency meeting with a potential investor. We had to drop her off first. No flowers, no celebration dinner. Just a quick photo in the parking lot before they rushed off again, because Claire needed emotional support after her meeting. Compare that to Claire's first fashion show 3 years earlier. The whole family flew to New York. 5-star hotel. Front row seats. Dad posted 17 photos on Facebook with captions like, "So proud of our talented girl." I got a parking lot photo and a lukewarm "congrats, honey." I told myself it made sense. The story you are listening to is a combination of real-life family situations, partially fictionalized with the aid of artificial intelligence. The purpose is to deepen the emotional experience and help convey the message. I hope it resonates with you. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. Please rest well and take care of yourself tonight. Claire needed more support. Fashion was unpredictable, unstable, competitive. Medicine, on the other hand, was stable, reliable. I could handle things on my own. At least, that's what I believed back then. What I didn't understand yet was that my parents' favoritism wasn't just emotional, it was financial. And I was the one paying for it. It started 8 years ago, not long after I finished medical school. One evening, my phone rang while I was studying for my residency exams. When I answered, my dad's voice sounded tight, the kind of tight that comes from someone who hates asking for help, but is about to do it anyway. "Maris," he said slowly, "we're in a bit of a bind right now." I remember sitting up straighter. "What kind of bind?" "The mortgage payment is due this week," he said. "Things are just tight this month. Could you help us out? Just this once." Just this once. That's exactly how he said it. There was hesitation in his voice, almost embarrassment, and that alone was enough to make my decision for me. They were my parents. Of course I would help them. That same night, I transferred $2,400 to their account without a second thought. I didn't ask questions. I didn't ask when they would pay me back. I just assumed it was temporary. But just this once quietly became every month. First, it was the mortgage. Then my dad's company dropped their health insurance plan and suddenly they needed help covering premiums. Another $800 every month. After that came the emergencies. The car repair that couldn't wait. The roof leak during a bad storm. The furnace that broke down in the middle of winter. Each time my phone would ring, and each time the conversation would begin the same way. Maris, we hate to ask, but... And every single time I said yes. Not once did I say no. Even when my own life started falling apart. When I got pregnant with the twins, their father walked out during my 5th month. Just disappeared from my life like he'd never been there. One night during my pregnancy, I had a frightening bleeding episode and ended up in the hospital. I remember lying there terrified, staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. So I called my parents. I didn't ask for money. I didn't ask them to fix anything. I just wanted them there. "Oh, honey," my mom said over the phone, her voice sympathetic but distant. "We wish we could come." There was a pause. "But Claire is so stressed right now after her show in Milan," she continued. "She really needs us." They didn't come. Not that night. Not for the birth of the twins. Not for the first month afterward when I was barely sleeping trying to care for 2 newborns while studying for my board exams. But the automatic transfers from my account kept going out. $2,400 for the mortgage, $800 for insurance, plus whatever else came up. I kept track of everything in a spreadsheet. I'm not even sure why. Maybe the doctor in me liked numbers, or maybe some small part of me needed to see the truth written down in black and white. The numbers were staggering. 8 years. About $320,000, give or take. A quiet river of money flowing out of my account and straight into my parents' lives. I never asked them to thank me. I never expected praise. I certainly didn't expect a parade. But I also never expected to be called a burden by the very people I had been carrying for almost a decade. The reckoning was coming. I just didn't know it yet. The accident happened on a Tuesday evening. I had just finished a brutal 16-hour shift at the hospital. My body felt like it was running on fumes, the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones after too many nights of broken sleep and too many hours standing under fluorescent lights. Still, I was alert enough to drive. I remember gripping the steering wheel as I headed home, already thinking about Oliver and Sophie. I wondered if they'd still be awake when I got there, or if the babysitter had already put them to bed. The thought made me smile for a second. Then the traffic light ahead of me turned green. I eased forward into the intersection. I never saw the truck. It came out of nowhere, running the red light at nearly 50 miles an hour. There was no screech of brakes, no warning. Just impact. The collision slammed into the driver's side door with a force so violent it felt like the entire world shattered at once. Glass exploded around me. Metal screamed. The steering wheel jerked in my hands as the car spun sideways. For a moment, everything blurred. Lights, motion, sound, and then everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on a stretcher. The ceiling above me was moving. No, not the ceiling. I was moving. The inside of an ambulance came slowly into focus. Pain tore through my abdomen, sharp and searing, making it hard to breathe. Maris. Maris, can you hear me? A familiar face hovered above me, slightly blurred at the edges. Maris, stay with me. I blinked, trying to focus. Daniel, I managed. Dr. Daniel Harper, one of the emergency physicians at the hospital where I worked, leaned closer. We'd worked together for almost 2 years. Yeah, he said gently. It's me. My voice came out weak and uneven. What's happening? You were in a car accident, Daniel said. We're taking you to the hospital now. There's a good chance you have internal bleeding. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before adding, You're probably going to need surgery. The word hit me like a second crash. Surgery. My mind snapped instantly to the only thing that mattered. My kids. I grabbed his arm with what little strength I had left. Oliver and Sophie, I gasped. They're with the babysitter. She leaves at 8. Daniel glanced down at his watch. It's 7:15. 45 minutes. That was all the time I had. 45 minutes to find someone to take care of my children while doctors open my abdomen in an operating room. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. There was dried blood on my fingers and it smeared across the screen as I tried to unlock it. I scrolled through my contacts and tapped my father's number. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. Finally, he answered. Maris, he said impatiently. We're about to head out. What is it, Dad? I said, struggling to breathe through the pain. I need help. The words tumbled out between gasps. I was in a car accident. I'm being taken to the hospital. They think I need surgery. Please, I just need you and Mom to watch the twins for a few hours. Silence. Then my father said, Hold on. I could hear voices on the other end of the line. My mother speaking sharply, Claire laughing in the background. Then the call ended. A moment later, my phone buzzed. A notification. Family group chat. The message was from my mother. Maris, you've always been a nuisance and a burden. We have Taylor Swift tickets with Claire tonight. We've been planning this for months. Figure it out yourself. I read the message once, then again, then a third time. The words didn't change. Another message appeared. From my father. You're a doctor. You're used to hospitals. Don't make this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. And then Claire. No words. Just a laughing emoji. That was it. That was all I was worth to them. A laughing emoji while I lay bleeding in the back of an ambulance. Across from me, Daniel was watching my face carefully. I hadn't even realized he could see my phone screen until he spoke. Maris, he said quietly. What did they say? I couldn't answer. Something had cracked open inside me, and it wasn't just the internal bleeding. I need a phone, I whispered. One with internet. Mine's about to die. Without hesitation, Daniel reached into his pocket and handed me his phone. I searched quickly for emergency nanny services, found one that offered 24-hour availability, and dialed. My voice sounded strangely calm as I explained the situation. Yes, I need someone immediately. Yes, there are 2 children. Yes, I will pay triple your normal rate. Yes, I'll provide the babysitter's contact information so they can coordinate the handoff. Yes, you're authorized to charge my card, right now. The entire conversation took 4 minutes. When I finished, I handed Daniel his phone back. He was still watching me. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Can you screenshot those messages? I asked quietly, holding up my phone before the battery died. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. I can do that. I closed my eyes as the ambulance pulled into the hospital bay. The sirens faded, replaced by the hurried voices of nurses and the rattle of wheels as my stretcher rolled through the emergency entrance. The pain was overwhelming now, but strangely, it didn't feel like it was coming from my abdomen anymore. It felt deeper than that. From that hospital bed with an IV already in my arm and fear pressing heavily against my chest, I made what turned out to be the easiest decision of my life. The surgery lasted 4 hours. Later, one of the surgeons explained what they had found. My spleen had ruptured. There was significant internal bleeding. If the ambulance had arrived even a few minutes later, the outcome might have been very different. Another 10 minutes, they said gently, and I might not have made it at all. I spent the next 5 days in the hospital. 5 long days drifting in and out of sleep, surrounded by IV drips, the fog of morphine, and nurses checking my blood pressure and oxygen levels every few hours. The days blurred together. But one thing remained painfully clear. Not one call from my parents. Not one text message. Not one visit. The emergency nanny service I had hired from the ambulance turned out to be worth every dollar I paid them. They coordinated smoothly with my regular babysitter, made sure Oliver and Sophie were fed, bathed, and tucked into bed every night. They even sent me daily photo updates. Little snapshots of my twins smiling at the camera, playing with blocks, eating cereal at the kitchen table. Strangers were taking better care of my situation than my own family ever had. On the third day in the hospital, I asked the nurse on duty if she could bring me my laptop from the drawer beside the bed. She looked at me with concern. "Are you sure you're up for that?" she asked gently. "You should probably be resting." "I just need to take care of something," I told her. My voice was calm. My hands were steady as I opened the laptop and logged into my banking app. 8 years of automatic transfers appeared on the screen. Perfectly organized, regular as clockwork. $2,400 on the 1st of every month. $800 on the 15th. Mortgage, insurance, and dozens of smaller transfers scattered throughout the years. Without hesitating, I canceled them. Every single one. Then I opened my phone settings and blocked 3 numbers. My father's, my mother's, and my sister Claire's. There was no dramatic moment, no tears, no second thoughts. It felt like setting down a weight I had been carrying for so long that I had forgotten it was even there. Dr. Daniel Harper stopped by later that afternoon. He had checked on me every day since the accident, usually bringing a cup of coffee, and sitting quietly in the chair beside my bed for a few minutes before heading back to the ER. "How are you feeling today?" he asked. I looked up at him, and for the first time in years I told the truth. "Better?" He raised an eyebrow slightly. For the first time in 8 years, I added slowly, "I actually feel better." Daniel studied my face for a moment like he understood more than I had said out loud. But he didn't ask questions. He simply nodded. I knew the fallout was coming. Sooner or later, my parents would notice that the money had stopped arriving. They would call. They would text. They would demand explanations. They would cry rage and accuse me of abandoning them. I was prepared for all of that. What I wasn't prepared for was what happened next. 2 weeks after my surgery, I was finally back home. I was still moving slowly, still sore every time I stood up too quickly, but I was alive. It was a Saturday morning. I was standing in the kitchen making pancakes for Oliver and Sophie, their favorite weekend breakfast. The smell of butter and maple syrup filled the room. Oliver was sitting on the floor nearby, trying very seriously to stack his toy blocks into a tall tower. Sophie was helping by knocking them down every time he finished. Their giggles filled the kitchen. For a moment, everything felt almost normal. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the front door. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, my heart suddenly beating faster. If it was my parents, I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure I would ever be ready. I walked slowly to the door and leaned toward the peephole. My breath caught. Standing on my doorstep was a tall man in his 70s. His silver hair was neatly combed and his sharp blue eyes were just as piercing as I remembered from childhood. His posture was straight, dignified, the kind of posture that comes from decades of authority, the authority of 40 years on the federal bench. My grandfather, Judge Edward Dean. I hadn't seen him in almost 3 years. My parents always had some excuse for why we couldn't visit. Too busy, too far, too inconvenient. I opened the door, and before I could say a word, he stepped forward and pulled me into a hug so tight it made my healing incision ache. "Maris," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "let me look at you." He stepped back and studied my face carefully, his gaze eventually dropping to the place where my hand rested protectively over my abdomen. "I know everything," he said quietly. "Aunt Eleanor told me." Aunt Eleanor, my mother's younger sister. The only person in the entire family who had ever openly questioned the way my parents treated me. "Grandpa, I started. He raised a hand, gently stopping me. "You don't need to explain anything," he said. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Cream-colored. Elegant. Formal. He held it out to me. An invitation. "My 71st birthday party is next Saturday," Grandpa said as he handed me the envelope. The whole family will be there. His eyes met mine, steady and serious. And I have some things that need to be said. A few minutes later, he was sitting at my kitchen table while Oliver and Sophie proudly paraded their toys across the floor in front of him. They had taken to him immediately. Oliver was trying to show him how tall he could stack his blocks, while Sophie insisted on placing plastic animals across the table, like they were attending an important meeting. Grandpa gave them his full attention. "Look at that tower," he said, leaning down to Oliver's level. "That's impressive." Oliver beamed. Sophie climbed onto the chair beside him and began explaining very seriously which stuffed animal was in charge. Grandpa listened like it was the most important conversation he'd had all week. After a moment, he looked over at me with a soft smile. "They look just like you did at that age," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" He nodded. "Same stubborn chin." I laughed quietly and placed 2 cups of coffee on the table before sitting across from him. For a moment we just sat there, the smell of pancakes still lingering in the kitchen. Finally, I asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind since I opened the door. "Grandpa, how did you find out about the accident?" I hesitated. "About everything." He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug, warming them slowly. "Your Aunt Eleanor called me the night it happened." My chest tightened slightly. "She heard about it through one of your cousins," he continued. "And when she found out what your parents did, she called me immediately." He paused. His jaw tightened slightly like he was holding back something heavier. "I've been watching this for years, Maris," he said quietly. "The way your parents treat you compared to Claire." I stared down at my coffee. "I thought maybe I was imagining it," I admitted softly. "Maybe I was making it bigger than it really was." "You weren't." His voice carried the quiet certainty of someone who had spent decades weighing truth against lies. "I was a federal judge for 40 years, he continued. "Reading people was my job. I know what favoritism looks like, and I know what exploitation looks like." The words landed heavier than I expected. He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me something," he said. "Do you still have records of the money you sent them?" I nodded slowly. "Every transfer," I said. "All 8 years." A faint, approving nod crossed his face. "Good." He leaned back in his chair. "I want you to put together a summary. A summary every payment," he said calmly. "Every date. Every amount." I frowned slightly. "Why?" He looked directly at me. "Because at my birthday party," he said evenly in front of the entire family, "I intend for the truth to come out." There was no anger in his voice, no bitterness, just certainty. "Not as an attack," he added. "Not as revenge." He tapped the table lightly. "Just facts." Then he gave the smallest shrug. "And facts, as I learned during 40 years on the bench, have a way of speaking for themselves." My hands trembled slightly around my coffee mug. "What if they hate me?" I asked quietly. Grandpa reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. "The ones who matter won't," he said. "And the ones who do." He paused. "Never deserved you in the first place." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. After the twins went to bed each night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, digging through years of bank records. I printed every statement, every transfer confirmation, every receipt. 8 years of financial history. I organized everything chronologically and placed the papers into a simple manila folder. Looking at it all together was staggering. Month after month, year after year. A quiet river of money flowing in only one direction. 3 days before the party, Aunt Eleanor came over to help me review everything. She was 55, sharp-tongued, and had always been considered the family's black sheep because she refused to pretend everything was perfect. She sat at my kitchen table, flipping through the folder page after page. Her expression darkened with each one. Finally, she stopped and leaned back in her chair. $360,000, she said flatly. She looked up at me. Maris, do you understand what this is? I nodded slowly. I know. She shook her head in disbelief. That's more than most people earn in 7 years of full-time work. She closed the folder and slid it across the table. And they called you a burden. I pressed my palms against the kitchen counter, trying to steady myself. I don't want to destroy the family, Aunt Eleanor, I said quietly. I just want them to see the truth. I want them to acknowledge what I've done. She stood up and walked over to me, resting a hand on my shoulder. You're not destroying anything, she said firmly. You're just stopping the lie. She gestured toward the folder on the table. They built their comfortable life on your silence. Then she gave me a pointed look. And you are not obligated to keep giving them that. I nodded slowly, even though my stomach was twisting with anxiety. What if everyone takes their side? I asked. She shrugged. Some might. Family is complicated. Then her expression softened slightly. But your grandfather carries a lot of weight in this family, she said. And more importantly, she tapped the folder once. You have the truth. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from a cousin I barely spoke to. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something made me open it. Heard you and your parents had a falling out, the text read. Claire's been telling everyone you've been acting erratic since your accident. There was a pause before the next line. Just thought you should know. I stared at the message for a long moment. So that was their plan. Before I had even stepped into my grandfather's house, they were already rewriting the story, painting me as unstable, emotional, unreliable. Setting the stage, preparing their defense. I exhaled slowly and locked my phone. I hadn't wanted a fight, but it seemed they were bringing one anyway. Grandpa Edward Dean's house sat on 3 acres of perfectly manicured land at the edge of town. It was a sprawling colonial estate with tall white columns and a wraparound porch that looked like something out of a magazine. The place had been in the family for decades. It had the kind of presence that whispered old money and quiet authority. The kind of place where reputations were made or destroyed. As I pulled into the circular driveway that Saturday evening, my hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Oliver and Sophie sat in their car seats behind me, both talking excitedly about the big house and the balloons they could see through the front windows. More than 40 cars were parked along the drive and the surrounding lawn. The entire family was here. I glanced down at the navy blue dress I had chosen earlier that afternoon. Simple, professional, understated. I hadn't come here to cause a scene. I had come to tell the truth. The manila folder rested in my bag on the passenger seat. 8 years of financial records. 8 years of silence. 8 years of being the quiet one who kept everything running. Tonight, that silence was ending. Inside the party was already in full swing. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying trays of champagne glasses. A string quartet played softly in the corner of the large living room. Crystal glasses and polished silverware sparkled beneath the light of the chandelier overhead. It looked elegant, civilized, perfect. But beneath the polished surface, I could already feel the tension waiting to erupt. I spotted my parents almost immediately. They were standing near the fireplace. My father, Richard Dean, wore his best suit and carried himself with the same quiet confidence he had always used around extended family, the posture of a man who believed he was respected. My mother, Helen Dean, stood beside him in a cream-colored dress, laughing at something one of my aunts had said. Then they saw me. My mother's laugh died instantly. My father's face went rigid. For several long seconds, none of us moved. Then Claire appeared. My older sister glided across the room toward me in a sleek designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly student loan payment. Her smile was flawless. Her eyes were not. They were cold. "Oh, Maris," she said lightly, leaning forward to air-kiss my cheek. "You made it." Her voice carried the faintest hint of amusement. "We heard about your accident," she continued. "Nothing too serious, I hope." I held her gaze. "A ruptured spleen," I said calmly. "Internal bleeding. I almost died." Her smile faltered for a split second. "Mom said it was just a fender bender," she replied. "Mom wasn't there." I shifted Sophie slightly on my hip. "None of you were?" For a brief moment, Claire's composure cracked. Then the polished mask slid back into place. "Well," she said, patting my arm with exaggerated sympathy, "you look fine now. That's what matters." She drifted away into the crowd before I could respond, but I could feel it, like distant thunder rolling across the sky. This was only the beginning. The attack came 30 minutes later. I was standing near the refreshment table pouring fruit punch for Oliver and Sophie when I heard Claire's voice carry across the room. Loud, deliberate. "I'm honestly so worried about Maris." She was standing near the dessert table with a group of aunts and cousins. Every head in the cluster turned toward her. "The accident really affected her," Claire continued sadly. "She's been saying the strangest things." My back stayed turned to them, but every word landed like a small knife. "She cut off all contact with Mom and Dad for no reason," Claire added. A few people gasped quietly. My mother stepped forward beside her, dabbing at the corner of her eye with a handkerchief. "We've tried everything," Helen said, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. "Calls, texts. She won't respond." She sniffed softly. "I think she may be having some kind of breakdown." "Oh dear," someone murmured. "Poor thing." Claire nodded solemnly. "She's always been the sensitive one," she said. "Remember how dramatic she was as a teenager?" A few relatives chuckled awkwardly. "I think the stress of being a single mom has just been too much for her." I felt the shift in the room immediately, the way conversations quieted, the way people began glancing in my direction. Pity, concern, whispered speculation. I said nothing. I simply handed Oliver his cup of juice and smoothed Sophie's hair. If they wanted to tell their story first, they could. The truth was still coming. A moment later, Aunt Eleanor appeared beside me. Her voice was low and furious. "What do you think about my grandfather showing up like that? Do you think he came to help me finally set the record straight and bring the truth out? If you believe Grandpa will help me get the justice I deserve, leave a 1 in the comments. Your thoughts really matter to me. Hearing your opinions and support helps me feel less alone and reminds me that someone out there understands what I'm going through." "They've been laying the groundwork all week," Aunt Eleanor murmured beside me, her voice tight with anger. "Calling relatives, planting little seeds everywhere. They know something's coming, so they're trying to discredit you before you even speak." "I know," I said quietly. She studied my face for a moment. "Are you okay?" Instead of answering, I looked across the room. My grandfather, Judge Edward Dean, stood near the far wall, a glass of whiskey resting calmly in his hand. His expression was unreadable, the same controlled mask he must have worn for decades while presiding over courtrooms and listening to arguments from both sides. Then his eyes met mine. He gave the smallest nod. It was barely noticeable to anyone else in the room, but I understood it perfectly. "I'm here." I exhaled slowly. "I'm fine," I told Aunt Eleanor. "Let them talk." As if on cue, the room suddenly began to quiet. Someone near the center of the room tapped a glass with a spoon. The soft clink echoed through the house. Conversations faded. The string quartet stopped playing. Grandpa set his whiskey glass down and slowly rose from his chair. Even at 70, he commanded attention the same way he must have during his 40 years as a federal judge. The room instinctively fell silent. Every head turned toward him. "Before we continue with the festivities," he said calmly, his voice carrying easily across the crowded room, "I have a few things I'd like to say." The air in the room shifted instantly. People leaned closer. Whispers faded. This was it. The moment everything would finally come out. But before Grandpa could continue, my father suddenly stepped forward. "Dad, wait." His voice sounded controlled, but I could see the tension pulling tight across his jaw. Grandpa raised one eyebrow. "Richard." My father turned to face the room, squaring his shoulders like an actor stepping onto a stage. Every inch of him looked like the concerned parent. "As many of you may have heard," he began sadly, "my daughter Maris has been going through a very difficult time lately." He gestured toward me with a sympathetic expression. "After her accident, she's been confused, distant. She's cut off contact with her mother and me completely." My mother Helen stepped forward beside him, clutching a handkerchief like she had practiced this moment in the mirror. "We've only ever wanted the best for her," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. "But lately she's been spreading terrible lies about us." Helen pressed the handkerchief to her eyes, saying we abandoned her, that we don't love her. The room fell completely silent. I could feel dozens of eyes turning toward me. 40 pairs of them, I thought distantly. Judging, watching, trying to decide who to believe. "We've tried to be patient." My father continued, shaking his head sadly. "But it's been heartbreaking." He spread his hands helplessly. "We gave that girl everything. Everything." Across the room, Claire's voice joined in smoothly. "She's even been claiming we refused to help her during her accident," she added. She gave a small, confused laugh, which obviously isn't true. There must be some misunderstanding. Someone near the back of the room murmured sympathetically. "Those poor parents." Another voice whispered something about stress and trauma. I stood frozen where I was. Oliver had buried his face in my shoulder, sensing the tension in the room. Sophie clung quietly to my arm. Mary's, an aunt I barely recognized, approached me cautiously. "Honey, is everything okay?" She glanced nervously toward my parents. "They're so worried about you." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. For a moment, I simply stood there, the center of a story that had already been rewritten without my permission. Then a voice cut through the room like the strike of a gavel. "Are you finished, Richard, Grandpa?" The words were calm, almost mild, but every person in that room heard the steel underneath. My father's confident expression faltered. "I just thought the family should know." "The family should know the truth," Grandpa interrupted. "And I intend to give it to them." He stepped forward, slowly walking toward the center of the room. His movements were measured and deliberate, the walk of a man who had presided over hundreds of cases and never once lost control of his courtroom. And suddenly the party didn't feel like a party anymore. It felt like a trial. "I've listened to your concerns," Richard, Grandpa said calmly. His voice carried easily through the silent room. "Helen, Claire, you've painted a very clear picture tonight." He paused for a moment, letting his words settle over the crowd. "A picture of a troubled young woman who has suddenly turned against her loving family." The silence deepened. Then he folded his hands lightly in front of him. Now he continued, "I'd like to ask a few questions." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, I don't think this is the place for—" "This is exactly the place." Grandpa's voice didn't rise, but it hardened. "This is family," he said evenly. "And families should know the truth about each other." Then he turned directly toward my father. "Richard, a simple question." My father forced a thin smile. "What question? Who has been paying the mortgage on your house for the past 8 years? The color drained from my father's face. "What?" "The mortgage," Grandpa repeated calmly. $2,400 a month. For 8 years. He tilted his head slightly. "Who has been paying it?" My father's eyes darted toward my mother. We pay our own mortgage." "Do you?" Grandpa reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folder. My folder. The same plain manila folder I had handed him earlier that week. Because Grandpa continued evenly holding it up slightly, I happen to have a complete record of bank transfers from Maris Dean's account to your mortgage company. He opened the folder slowly. Every month. For 96 consecutive months. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. That's a misunderstanding, my mother stammered. Maris offered. We never asked. Grandpa didn't even look up. I'm not suggesting you held a gun to her head, he said calmly. I'm simply establishing facts. He turned another page. Let's share a few numbers with the family. I think they'll find them illuminating. Across the room, Claire had gone pale. My father's hands were clenched so tightly at his sides that his knuckles had turned white. My mother looked like she might faint. And I stood there holding Oliver and Sophie, my heart pounding as the truth began unfolding piece by piece. 8 years, Grandpa said as he read from the folder. Let's break that down. The room was completely silent now. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. Mortgage payments, Grandpa continued. $230,400. He looked up briefly. That is the house Richard and Helen Dean live in, the same house they claim to pay for themselves. Someone in the room gasped quietly. Grandpa flipped to the next page. Health insurance premiums. $76,800. He glanced toward my father. When Richard's company dropped their coverage, Maris quietly picked up the bill. Another page turned. Car repairs, home maintenance, emergency expenses, approximately $45,000. Then another page. Cash gifts and financial support for Claire's fashion ventures, $12,000. Finally, Grandpa closed the folder. Total. $364,200, give or take. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Aunt Eleanor stepped forward beside him. For context, she said clearly, looking around the room, that's more than most people earn in 7 years of full-time work. She gestured toward me. Maris did this while completing one of the most demanding medical residencies in the country and raising newborn twins alone. My mother's voice cracked. We never forced her. No one said you forced her, Grandpa replied calmly. But I am curious about something. He looked directly at them. In 8 years of receiving that support, how many times did you say thank you? No answer. The room waited. How many times did you visit her in the hospital after her twins were born? Silence. How many times did you show up for her when she needed you? Still nothing. Then my mother began crying. Not the delicate, sympathetic tears she had displayed earlier. These were loud, ugly sobs. We thought she was fine, my father said weakly. His voice sounded hollow now. She never complained. She always managed. Grandpa repeated the words slowly. She managed. Then his eyes hardened. Because she had to. He paused. Because you taught her that her needs didn't matter. An uncle near the back of the room shook his head slowly. Jesus, Richard, he muttered. $360,000. And you called her a burden. My father flinched as if the words had physically struck him. But Grandpa wasn't finished. There's one more thing the family should hear, he said calmly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, adjusting his reading glasses as he unlocked the screen. 2 months ago, Grandpa continued, Maris was in a very serious car accident. The room fell silent again. She was bleeding internally and being rushed to emergency surgery. My chest tightened slightly as I watched him speak. From the ambulance, Grandpa said she called her parents. He turned slowly and looked directly at my mother and father. Her children, Oliver and Sophie, were home with a babysitter who was about to leave. She needed someone to watch them for a few hours. He paused. Then he held up the phone. This, he said quietly, is the text message she received in response. My mother's shoulders tensed. Grandpa cleared his throat and read the message aloud. Maris, you've always been a nuisance and a burden. We have Taylor Swift tickets tonight with Claire. We've been planning this for months. Figure it out yourself. For a moment, the room was completely still. Then it exploded. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "That can't be real." Another voice gasped in shock. Across the room, Claire stepped forward quickly. "That's not your taking it out of context," she said desperately. "There is no context," Aunt Eleanor snapped immediately. Her voice cut through the room like a whip. "There is absolutely no context that makes abandoning your daughter during a medical emergency acceptable." "We didn't know it was serious," my father shouted suddenly. Grandpa's voice cut through the noise like a judge's gavel. "Did you ask silence? Did you call her back? Still silence? Did you go to the hospital?" The room was so quiet now that I could hear someone shift their weight across the floor. Grandpa lowered his phone slowly. "For anyone wondering," he said calmly, "the answers are no, no, and no." A woman I recognized as a distant cousin stepped away from my parents, her expression twisting with disgust. Then another relative followed. And another. The quiet movement of people stepping back from them felt louder than any argument. My mother had begun sobbing uncontrollably. Not the dramatic tears from earlier. These were real, messy, panicked. "I didn't mean it like that," she cried. I was frustrated. "I didn't think you didn't think your daughter might die." Grandpa finished for her. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Because you never thought about her at all." He turned slowly to face the rest of the room. "I'm not asking anyone here to pass judgment," he said evenly. "I'm simply presenting the facts." He spread his hands slightly. "What you choose to do with those facts is your own decision." Then his gaze moved back to me. The hardness in his expression softened. "Maris," he said gently, "is there anything you'd like to say? I hadn't planned to speak." When I walked into that house tonight, I had expected Grandpa to handle everything, to let the numbers and the facts speak for themselves while I stood quietly in the background. But as I looked around the room, at my mother crying, at my father standing there stunned and pale, at Claire's carefully constructed confidence beginning to crumble, I realized something. I did have something to say. I handed Sophie gently to Aunt Eleanor, then stepped forward. "I didn't come here for revenge," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. "I came because Grandpa invited me." I looked around the room at the faces watching me, and because for 34 years, I've been living with a version of my family that wasn't real. A few relatives exchanged glances, a version where I was the strong one. I continued. The reliable one, the one who didn't need anything. I looked directly at my parents. For years, I had believed every explanation they gave me. "I believed you," I said quietly, "when you told me Claire needed more support because her career was harder." My voice trembled slightly, but I didn't stop. "When you said medicine was stable, that I could handle things on my own, I believed you." A tear slid slowly down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. "And I tried," I continued. "I tried to be exactly what you needed me to be." My father shifted uncomfortably. My mother was still crying. But that night in the ambulance, I said softly when I was bleeding and terrified, "I finally understood something." I looked at them steadily. "I wasn't strong to you." I paused. "I was convenient." The words hung heavily in the air. "I wasn't reliable," I continued. "I was exploitable. And no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough to make you see me the way you see her." Around me, several relatives had stepped closer. One of my aunts placed a gentle hand on my arm. A cousin near the back of the room nodded slowly, his eyes shining with emotion. My father opened his mouth. "Maris, I'm not finished." My voice wasn't loud, but it stopped him. "I don't hate you," I said quietly. That seemed to surprise everyone. "But I can't keep pretending that this is okay." I took a slow breath. "I can't keep buying love that should have been free." Across the room, one of my uncles turned toward my father in disbelief. "How could you do this, Richard?" he demanded. "This whole time you've been living off your daughter, while treating her like she was nothing." The mood in the room had completely shifted now. I could feel it. People weren't whispering sympathetically about my parents anymore. They were staring at them, judging them. My father's voice suddenly sounded desperate. "So what now?" he asked. "You've humiliated us in front of the entire family." His eyes burned into mine. "Are you happy?" I shook my head slowly. "I'm not happy, Dad. None of this makes me happy." The room remained completely still, but I'm also not sorry. I lifted my chin slightly, because this isn't about humiliation. It's about honesty. For the first time in 8 years, I said firmly, "Our family finally knows the truth. Not your version. Not Claire's version. The truth." Claire stepped forward suddenly. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're acting like we're monsters." She crossed her arms. "We're your family. Families help each other." "You're right." I turned to face her. "Families do help each other." Then I asked quietly, "Where were you when I was pregnant and alone?" Claire didn't answer. "Where were you when I was raising 2 newborns while studying for my board exams?" Silence. "Where were you when I was bleeding out in the back of an ambulance?" Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I turned back to my parents. "From now on," I said calmly, "I won't be sending money anymore." Gasps rippled through the room. "Not because I can't afford it," I continued, "but because financial support should be a gift, not an obligation. And in a real family, it should flow both ways." My mother stepped toward me, reaching out with trembling hands. "Maris, please, I'm not cutting you off forever," I said before she could finish. "But I need space. Real space. Not a few weeks of guilt-tripping before everything quietly goes back to the way it was." I looked directly at them. "I need you to actually think about what you've done, and if one day you can truly acknowledge it." I paused. "Maybe we can rebuild something." I stepped forward and gently took Sophie back from Aunt Eleanor. But I won't hold my breath. For several seconds, no one said anything. Then one of my great-aunts slowly approached me. She took my hands in hers, her skin soft and wrinkled with age. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she said quietly. "I had no idea." Her eyes filled with regret. "All these years, I thought you were the one who had it easy." I nodded slowly. "I know." My voice softened. "Everyone did. That's how it was supposed to look." Across the room, my parents stood frozen. No one rushed to comfort them. No one defended them. The story they had built for years had just collapsed in front of everyone, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one carrying the weight of it. I looked around the room once more, then toward the door. That moment, the moment I finally said those words, was the first time I had ever truly chosen myself. And if you've ever been in a situation like that, where family expectations demanded endless sacrifice, then you know how difficult that choice can be. But here's the truth I learned. Boundaries are not betrayal, and saying no is not selfish. If you agree with that, type boundaries in the comments. And if you know someone who might need to hear a story like this, share it with them. Because sometimes, the hardest thing in life is learning that loving yourself doesn't mean you love your family any less. It just means you've finally stopped letting them hurt you. That night, my parents left the party early. No one stopped them, and no one said goodbye. My father helped my mother to the car while she sobbed into his shoulder. Claire followed behind them with her head lowered, refusing to meet anyone's eyes as they walked across the driveway. The confidence she had carried into the party was completely gone. No one tried to stop them. No one rushed after them. The front door closed quietly behind them, and the silence that followed felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that settles after a violent storm finally passes. For the first time that evening, people began to breathe again. In the days that followed, the fallout came quickly. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from relatives. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly reached out. Aunts and uncles who had always believed my parents' version of our family began rethinking everything they thought they knew. One afternoon, I received a message from my cousin Rachel. "I always thought you were the difficult one," she wrote. "Claire made it sound like you pulled away from the family for no reason." There was a pause before the next message appeared. "I'm really sorry I believed that." I stared at the text for a long moment before replying with a simple thank you. The family group chat, the same one where I had received that devastating message from my mother, went completely silent. A few days later, it disappeared entirely. Deleted, as if it had never existed. But the bigger change happened quietly. My parents slowly found themselves excluded from family gatherings. No one made a dramatic announcement. No one declared sides. It just happened. 3 weeks later, when my cousin Michael celebrated his 40th birthday, my parents weren't invited. When Aunt Eleanor hosted Easter brunch, their names weren't on the guest list. When relatives met for weekend dinners or holiday planning, they simply stopped including them. The invitations stopped coming, and gradually, they stopped showing up. 2 weeks after the party, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. I stared at the screen for a moment before letting it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, the message notification appeared. I listened to it once. "Maris, please." My mother's voice pleaded. "We need to talk." She sounded exhausted. "This has all been blown out of proportion. Your father is devastated. And so am I." There was a long pause. "Can't we just move past this?" I sat there for a long time after the message ended. Then I deleted it. Because I understood something now that I hadn't understood before. Forgiveness wasn't a reset button. It didn't erase the past. Forgiveness, when it came, would be something I did for myself. Not something I offered just because someone else demanded it. And I wasn't ready for that yet. But the financial consequences of my decision were just beginning. 3 months after Grandpa's birthday party, my phone rang again. This time, it was Aunt Eleanor. "They're selling the house," she said, without preamble. I slowly set down my coffee mug. "What, your parents?" she clarified. "They put the house on the market last week. Word is they can't keep up with the mortgage payments." I leaned back in my chair. For a moment, I expected to feel something. Satisfaction. Vindication. Maybe even guilt. But what I felt instead was something simpler. Exhaustion. "Where will they go?" I asked quietly. "Your Uncle Frank is letting them stay in his guest house for now," Eleanor said. Then she added, "But it's temporary. He made it very clear that it's conditional." Conditional, how they need to get jobs. Real jobs. Her tone carried a sharp edge. Not just sitting around waiting for someone else to bail them out. Jobs. The word sounded strange when applied to my parents. My father had taken early retirement at 55. My mother had never worked outside the home at all. For years, they had lived comfortably, supported by the steady stream of money I sent every month. And somewhere along the way, they had stopped realizing how dependent they had become on it. "What about Claire?" I asked. "Can't she help them?" Eleanor laughed softly. It wasn't a kind laugh. "Claire's been drowning since the divorce." She paused. "And after the party?" Word spread. Apparently, someone in the family had connections in the fashion world. And reputations traveled quickly. "She lost a major design contract," Eleanor continued. "The last I heard, she's waitressing part-time now." I walked over to the kitchen window. Outside, Oliver and Sophie were playing in the backyard, chasing each other across the grass and laughing loudly. "I don't want them to suffer," I said quietly. "I know you don't," Eleanor replied gently. "That's because you're a good person." Her voice softened. "But they didn't suffer for 8 years while you were supporting them. They didn't grow. They didn't learn." She paused. "You stopping wasn't cruel. It was necessary." I didn't answer, because deep down, I knew she was right. That evening after the twins went to bed, I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop. For the first time in years, I rebuilt my monthly budget. The $3,200 I used to send to my parents every month, the mortgage payment and insurance premiums went somewhere else now, into a college fund for Oliver and Sophie. I stared at the numbers for a moment. My children would never have to worry about crushing student loans. They would never have to carry someone else's financial burden the way I had. And somehow, that felt like enough. That felt like justice. 6 months after Grandpa's party on a quiet Tuesday night, my phone rang again. I was putting Oliver and Sophie to bed when my phone lit up with an unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something, maybe instinct, maybe curiosity, made me answer. Hello. There was a small pause on the other end, then a voice I hadn't heard in months. Maris. It was Claire, but she sounded different, smaller. The polished confidence that had defined her for most of our lives was gone. Claire, please, don't hang up. Her voice trembled slightly. She took a shaky breath before continuing. I know I don't deserve your time, she said quietly, but I need to say something. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. Oliver and Sophie were already half asleep under their blankets, unaware of the moment unfolding beside them. I'm listening, I said. There was a long pause. Then she spoke. I'm sorry. The words came out cracked. I'm so sorry for everything, for the way I treated you, for the things I said. Her voice faltered, and for laughing at that message. When you were... She stopped. When you were dying. Silence filled the line. What kind of person does that? She whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't know, she continued after a moment. About the money. Not all of it. I knew Mom and Dad were struggling sometimes, but I thought they were managing. Her voice broke slightly. I didn't realize it was you. For 8 years. She exhaled shakily. Maris, how did I not know? Did you ever ask? I asked quietly. Silence. Then her answer came in a whisper. No, I didn't ask. Because I didn't want to know. Another pause. I liked being the favorite, she admitted. I liked that everything came easy for me. A bitter laugh escaped her. Well, nothing's easy anymore. I heard about the contract, I said. Yeah, she replied softly. Turns out reputation matters in the fashion industry. Funny how that works. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said something that surprised me. I'm not calling to ask for money. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. Her voice steadied slightly. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. What I was. What Mom and Dad did. I see all of it. I took a slow breath. Then start from there, I said. Stand on your own feet. Be better. She sniffed softly. I'm trying. Good. I ended the call, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to hope. 6 months after that phone call, 1 full year after the accident that changed everything, I stood in the living room of my new apartment, watching the sunset through the large windows. The place wasn't big. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen. But it was only 5 minutes from the hospital and located in a good school district. And most importantly, it was mine. No mortgage payments going to parents who never appreciated them. No insurance premiums for people who had once called me a burden, just rent, utilities, and a college fund growing steadily every month for Oliver and Sophie. That evening, the twins were at Grandpa Edward's house for the afternoon. Over the past year, he had become a permanent part of our lives. Every Sunday, he picked them up for what he called adventures. Trips to the zoo, walks in the park, ice cream outings that I pretended not to know about. They're good kids, he told me once. You're raising them right. Hearing that from him meant more to me than he probably realized, and Aunt Eleanor had become something more than just family. She had become a friend. We had dinner together at least twice a month now. She helped me navigate the emotional aftermath of the party, the boundaries, the guilt, the strange feeling of finally putting myself first. "You know what I admire about you," she told me recently over dinner. "You didn't become bitter. A lot of people would have. You had every right to." I had smiled slightly. "What would be the point?" I replied. "Bitterness is just drinking poison and expecting someone else to get sick." As for my parents, we hadn't spoken directly since that voicemail. But family whispers carried news from time to time. They were still staying at Uncle Frank's guest house. My father had taken a part-time job at a hardware store. My mother had started doing bookkeeping for a small local church. They weren't thriving, but they were surviving. Some days I wondered if they thought about me, if they missed their grandchildren, if they regretted anything. But those weren't questions I needed to answer anymore. I had spent 34 years carrying their expectations, their needs, their silence. It was finally time to put that weight down. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I want to leave you with one final thought. Not advice, just something I learned the hard way. For most of my life, I believed love was something you earned, that if I gave enough, sacrificed enough, asked for nothing in return, eventually the people who were supposed to love me would see my value. But I was wrong. Love isn't a transaction. It's not a reward for being useful. And no amount of money, time, or effort can buy something that should have been freely given from the beginning. The family I have now, Grandpa Edward, Aunt Eleanor, and friends like Dr. Daniel Harper who stood by me when my own parents they didn't love me because of what I could provide. They loved me because of who I am. And that makes all the difference. It took almost dying on an operating table for me to understand that. I don't know what will happen next with my parents. Maybe someday they'll truly change. Maybe one day they'll reach out with genuine remorse and a willingness to rebuild something real. If that day comes, I'll think about it. But I won't wait for it. I won't shape my life around the hope of something that might never come. My life is mine now. My energy, my resources. Standing in that room and finally speaking the truth taught me something I wish I had understood much earlier. Being strong doesn't mean carrying everyone else's weight forever. Sometimes strength means setting a boundary even when the people you're standing up to are the ones who raised you. I spent years believing that if I gave enough money, time, patience, love would eventually come back to me. But real love doesn't have to be purchased or proven through sacrifice. It shows up when you need it most. I'm curious what you would have done if you were in my place that night in the ambulance, or standing in that room with everyone watching. Would you have stayed silent or chosen to speak? And wherever you're listening from right now, I'd truly love to know. Stories like this travel much farther than we think. If this one made you pause, reflect, or even helped you see your own situation a little more clearly, then your small action today can help someone else too. A single subscription from you helps this story reach another person who might need the courage to stand up for themselves. Your like, comment, or share could change how someone sees their own life. So if you feel this message matters, help it travel a little further.